Hi, I'm Shauna, and I'm going to show you today how to do the collar and facing for the Maxwell top. And we'll go ahead and get started. Alright, with your Maxwell top, you should have your facing sewn to the shirt and pressed out flat like mine are. And it should also be sewn together at the shoulders, pressed and top stitched. And then you're going to take your undercollar piece, which is going to be the underneath side of the collar, and it should have the interfacing pressed onto the back. And you're going to match up, I fold it in half to find my center. And so you find your center mark here, and you're going to want to find the center of the back, which I also fold in half to find. So match up the center back pieces with the angling downward. So that's the side. And then from there, you're going to see that you're matching a straight edge with a curved neck. So it works best if you just kind of match up the raw edges as you move outward. And I pin pretty often when I am matching up a curved and straight edge, because it helps make sure that everything is smooth. Alright, when you get to the end where your collar stops, you should have about a ½ inch gap between the collar stopping and where the facing begins, where that seam is. And if you don't, just trim away any bit of the collar. Sometimes the way you sewed your seams can make it so that they don't match up perfectly, but you always want at least that much space. Alright, you'll see on this side, my collar stops, but I only have about a ½ inch of space. No big deal. Just take our scissors, and keeping with that same angle, just trim away a little bit of the collar so that you've got your nice gap. Alright, now that we've sewn that line, the undercollar to the neck, we're going to simply cut little notches. This is considered clipping the curve. And you want to do that anytime you're sewing a straight and curved edge, but also anytime you're sewing a curved edge, more importantly, because that's what makes it lay nice and smooth. So just cut little notches. Be careful not to cut the actual seam you just stitched. And then what we'll do is we'll go over and we're going to press that seam up towards the collar with an iron. Okay, now your seam should be pressed upward, and you want to do that so that when you are sewing the collar, when it's all done, that this raw edge is completely hidden in the collar. So now flip your piece over. So you've got the front side of the collar, and you can lay it as flat as you can there. And then with the other collar piece, the outside piece, or the piece of the part of the collar that will show, you want to fold the bottom edge under, and the bottom edge is where the angle angles it down towards. You want the narrower end to be folded upward, about 3/8 inch. And then you're going to press, this becomes the wrong side and this is the right side. With my fabric you can't really tell, but then you're going to just simply lay the collars together and pin them together, right sides together. And if you remember, we trimmed one side of the collar because it was a little bit too big, and you'll see there. So you just want to trim this one to fit the seam. Alright, when you're doing your collar, you can see on mine, it covers that edge, the seam, on this side, but then it doesn't totally do it in the middle, and then it does again over here. It can be sometimes just the way you've pressed it. What I'll do is I'll just arrange my pins a little bit so that that edge is covered. That's how you know that when you go to sew, it'll work out nice and smooth for you. so my folded edge covers that seam that we just stitched. And now what we'll do is we'll sew from just above the fold up to the corner, across the top to the other corner. Okay, now that the collar pieces are sewn together, we're going to clip the corners to eliminate the bulk at the corners. And then you shouldn't have to clip anything else because that should be a relatively straight edge. Now the next part that we're going to do before we flip the collar over is we're going to take our facing, our front facing here, and we are going to fold it in so that right sides are together. And just this little corner, remember how we left a little spacing? We're going to sew from the corner there, from the collar, to the edge. And you can kind of round it a little, you can go straight. It's your personal preference on however you want the finish to be. But we're just going to sew a little line right there on both sides of the facing. Okay, as you can see, when that line is stitched, it should look like a continuous line from the seam, from your neckline to the collar, all the way down. And I like to round mine, it's my own personal preference. So in doing that, I'm left with a corner here, and we're just going to cut that off. It eliminates the bulk when we turn it right side out. So we'll do that on both sides. Okay, now we're going to flip the pieces right side out. And this can be kind of one of the trickier parts, but it's really quite simple. So we're just going to turn the pieces right side out, and when you're turning at the collar, just poke the corners, which have been trimmed away, so it should be pretty easy to get a nice pointed corner. And we're turning the neck piece around to the inside then, and we're going to do the same with the facing, and just round out that cornered edge and turn the facing around to the inside. So your raw edge here will line right up to the neckline edge that was stitched. It will cover that raw edge that you pressed upward. And when you get to the end, just tuck the edge. You kind of have to maneuver stuff so that it all lays flat here. But tuck your edge of your facing under and line it up with the shoulder seam. And if it's a little under the shoulder seam, that's totally fine. And then what I do just to hold it all still until we press is just pin it to the shirt. So that will be folded under, and that should match up the seam. And then you're going to take your collar with the folded edge here, and it's going to go right over that, covering that seam. And the little corner piece here, you just want to tuck that under, and you'll top stitch that down. You don't want the raw edge from that corner out. So I usually put my first pin right there. And then just keep going along the edge of your neckline, matching up the fold so that it goes. I usually just follow my stitch line, and it will cover the raw seam as it goes. And when you make it across the other side, you're just going to want to do the same thing over here, matching up the seam or the edge and turning under that edge. Okay, we're going to start the sewing by sewing just along that folded edge that encases the seam. So start there. And then when you get to the end, I usually just go ahead and pivot there, right up around the edge, outside edge of the collar. And you end at the same place you started then. And the next thing we're going to sew is the piece down at the shoulder. So you're just going to sew it right along the shoulder. Okay, the very last thing that we will sew is with the facing front face out. We'll just sew right along the outside edge. Alright, so now you have your front facing sewn, and it is a decorative line, so if you don't want the thread to show, use a thread that matches. But pockets go and buttons and everything else. So, and that's how you have a nice finished inside and outside, and then the collar just folds downward. Easier to do when the entire shirt's all assembled, but you just fold the collar down, and then the little overlap that you have left is so that the collar meets in the middle when the buttons are added. So now you can finish your Maxwell shirt, and that hopefully answered any questions about the collar.